Shalom. Here's a presentation of the study course, Political Economy of Defense and Security, Priorities, Budget and Legal Framework. The course is based on historical economic data from all democracies and public choice analytical approach. The course is strongly non-recommended to vulnerable people like snowflakes because it's full of pieces of macro-aggression. So, let's go. All relevant historical patterns teach us that the very basic function and main goal of the government is to protect citizens from foreign aggression, from foreign force. This state responsibility was prescribed since Pentateuch and Prophets. Pentateuch prohibits the king to multiply gold and silver, but one need to pay salary to warriors, and prevents king from multiplying the horses, but one exemption to provide battle chariots. Under taxpayers' democracy, the citizens, taxpayers, the same people as voters and warriors usually, perceive the state, the government, as an instrument of defense and force coordination. On the eve of big change in the most basic, fundamental political institutions of democracy, a universal conscription implementation paved the way and provided good reasoning to require universal suffrage. One man, one vote, one rifle was the slogan of Sweden's Social Democrats. Implementation of universal suffrage paves the way, respectively, to the welfare state. Rise of welfare state, social democracy, effectively means that social bureaucrats, allied with happiness-promoting politicians, as a kind of collective patron, acquired support of clients, purchased support of clients, socially dependent voters at the cost of taxpayers. And this new group of voters, socially dependent, tax spenders, their perception of the government is basically different from perception of taxpayers and warriors. For them, government is a source of goods, not the instrument for defense collective actions. Government priorities had experienced fundamental change since the implementation of universal suffrage and, respectively, rise of welfare state. The care from cradle to grave substituted the defense, law and order, means night watchman state or small government, limited government functions, classical functions of the government. Are the new priorities compatible with efficient protection against foreign enemy, against terrorists financially first and foremost? It's one of the key topics of the course. Are the new priorities compatible with efficient defense institutionally? Is welfare state in practice compatible with strong, respected, revered armed forces? Under taxpayers' democracy and night watchman state, defense costs usually varied between 1 to 7% of GDP. Closer to the upper boundary for short period, relatively short periods of small wars, or years of the most intensive repayment of previous past big war debt. Under welfare state, social democracy, under universal suffrage, Western democracies taxpayers had paid approximately 2 to 4%, up to 4% of GDP during the Cold War, and since 1990s, usually 1 to 2% of GDP. Nowadays, government funds gigantic social programs well above 25% of GDP, at least. A huge spending creates unprecedented peacetime budget deficits and respectively peacetime public debt. Taxpayers' democracy repaid the wartime debts in peacetime balanced the budget and had usually zero inflation, while modern, from the modern democracies, non-zero inflation is just a routine phenomenon. The rise of public debt make this problem very tough challenge for modern developed countries. So welfare state bribing dependent voters can't balance a budget in peacetime, even in peacetime, and tries not to repay but just to control size of public debt. This debt has been created and mounted exclusively in peacetime. It's the principal difference from public debt in previous epochs when it rose during war, especially during big war. So, can we save enough money to meet welfare state needs, cutting the military spending? One could find a very clear answer to this question in our course. Traditional anti-military posture of happiness-promoting politicians, like lefts, socialists, is broadly famous. Even quite moderate British Labours had rejected the idea to balance Nazi Air Force power just before World War II. We deny the need to increase our Air Force. We utterly reject any pretense of equality, told Clement Attlee, leader of British Labours, cited by Winston Churchill. Social bureaucrats are not happy to spend more for defense, and they may be even more unhappy with strong, efficient, and revered by public armed forces as a potential complication to justify their own ever-failing welfare state projects. Contrary to common wisdom, military bureaucrats could be quite happy with welfare state. First and foremost, they have every year they guaranteed fair share of 1-2% of GDP, and more important, welfare state not going to war with very few exemptions. Like one could see that NATO countries avoid by any means to charge Putin on the Ukrainian soil, while now it's quite clear that Putin's army not so strong, not so tough as one could imagine 2 months ago. So again, welfare state tries to avoid war by any means. So from military bureaucrats means military bureaucrats avoids any responsibility for efficiency of spending projects they managed, because they avoid practical test in battlefield of efficiency of their spending. In the not so distant past, the society required from the army to protect fellow citizens against foreign enemies. Successful generals, tough soldiers, they hailed and rewarded for their success, measured usually by number of foes eliminated. New military moral, so-called moral and so-called justice, claim that lives of civilians exploited as a life shield by enemy are matter. What about the fellow citizens' lives? Are they still matter too? Can we prioritize both groups' lives simultaneously? More enemies killed actions usually coincide with high probability of collateral damage. So, the big success usually coincides with significant civilian losses. We survey how military hero of past could be easily turned into war criminal now. New military justice history started in 1977, since Protocol 1 to the Geneva Convention of 1949. New military justice caused new role assumed or usurped by the military lawyers or prosecutors as a kind of shadow commander. They got a lot of power with minimal or zero responsibility for outcome of a battle. What is happening with civilized nations' arms capacity to produce deterrence effect under new military moral and new military justice. So, the key topics of this course are two ends of the state and respective sides of thereof. One option to only protect from evil under small limited government, or to promote happiness by the big unlimited government. Defense economic burden dynamics since taxpayers' democracy. Reasons behind support of welfare state both by social and by military bureaucracy. Traditional army's moral versus new army moral. Traditional military justice before 1977 and new military justice. The conversion of military hero into the war criminals. Why deterrence idea has been fallen from the grace. The new military justice and army's capacity to create and to support deterrence effect. So, main learning outcome of the course are following. After completing the course, students will be aware about principal political and economic interests, both personal and collective, behind the trends and above mentioned developments. Students will be able to explain incentives of principal groups of voters, taxpayers and tax spenders, cover military costs of the country, civil and military bureaucrats' incentives and interests, why they aren't happy with gifted military leader, elected politicians' preference, both promoters of happiness and proponents of small limited government. Students will see principal distinction in a ways how responsibility for civilians' lives is defined in the original version of 1949 Fourth Geneva Convention and in the amended 1977 version. The student will acquire a basic set of historical facts from economic history, how democracies covered their military spending in war and in peacetime, the typical military burden including repayment of war debts. Students should be able to present relevant specific democratic country's story to explain how principal institutional changes between World War I and World War II as a consequence of implementation of universal suffrage shaped modern approach to the defense and the rest of public goods provision. Students will outline the post-World War II development before and since the end of Cold War by the 9/11 of 2001 and then latest development. Students will be able to explain how the deterrence effect saves money of taxpayers and saves the lives of all people in their country.